Hello everyone, I am the Meta Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Dominaria United, Stangg Echo Warrior. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck text, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Stangg is a 3/4 human warrior for 2 generic, 1 red and 1 green. He has an incredibly fun callback triggered ability on attacking that creates a copy of himself called Stangg Twin that's also tapped on attacking. However, this copy is a copy in every sense since it'll also copy each aura and equipment attached to Stangg to then attach to Stangg Twin. So if Stangg had 10 auras and or equipment attached to him when he attacks, his clone copy will also get those same auras and equipment attached to him. The only downside to this ability is that all copies get sacrificed at the end of the turn. That being said, Stangg is an incredibly fun Voltron commander since he gives you the potential of hitting 2 opponents at once. Granted, only one of them will receive combat damage, but you'd still be giving quite the smack with his twin as well. Since Stangg copies both equipment and auras, let's start with the equipment of the deck. I gave priority to those equipment cards that possess some form of triggers. For example, Trailblazer's Torch has an enter the battlefield trigger, as well as a trigger for when the equipped creature gets blocked. However, the most impactful one is getting the initiative since it lets you venture into Undercity. This dungeon is great because you can get basic lands into your hand, make a creature bigger, make an opponent lose life, draw cards, create treasure, get chump blockers, and get an epic prize for completing it. Best thing about the initiative is that you can still get the initiative even if you already have it. And if someone managed to take it away from you, you can get it back with the torch entering the battlefield. This equipment does some serious work. Koma Inu Battle Armor, the Reaver Cleaver, and Scepter of Celebration are equipment that trigger upon combat damage. The first one is super important because this is essentially a Voltron deck and thus potentially susceptible to waves of aggression against us. However, if we're at least able to go to the 2 biggest boards on the table, we're relatively safe. Scepter of Celebration also helps in this regard because it has the potential of creating a ton of 1/1 tokens which can then be used to chump block. The Reaver Cleaver is absolutely busted at potentially generating a ton of mana for us, and it's not the only ability like it in the deck. This has the potential of going infinite with some other tech in the deck, but we'll see that soon. The one true downside of this is being legendary, so Stangg Twin won't be able to use it because of the legendary rule, unless of course you have Mirror Box in play. Bypassing the legend rule will not only allow us to be able to copy any legendary auras or equipment, but Stangg Twins as well, but we'll see those interactions soon. As a bonus, it also pumps our legendary creatures +1/+1, which Stangg and Twin don't mind at all. Tanuki Transplanter is another mana acceleration piece in equipment form, but this one triggers on attack and not combat damage. The advantage of this is that if Stangg manages to get chump blocked and or he can't get through to an opponent's face, you're still generating all that green mana on attack that will not empty from your mana pool until the end of turn. However, that provides the disadvantage of not triggering with Stangg's Twin since he's already attacking when entering the battlefield. This is why I avoided most effects that trigger on attack, this one being the exception since it's just so good. Skull Clamp is another amazing equipment with a triggered ability. Since Stangg Twin and all auras and equipment copies created have to be sacrificed at the end of turn, we'll always be drawing 2 cards off of that death, and it also pumps power as a bonus. Not only does this work in this way, but once we're creating waves of 1/1 weenies, we can move it around for just 1 mana each time if we need to be drawing tons of cards. So good. Hammer of Nazan also has an enter the battlefield trigger when it auto attaches, which is great since we can protect Stangg without having to spend any extra mana equipping it. Not only that, but it also gives that same ability to further equipment, so any new equipment entering the battlefield get auto-equipped. This is absolutely insane in this deck. This can help Stangg get that commander damage win much faster. Those equipment copies that enter the battlefield attached to Stangg Twin will trigger the hammer. We can then just have them get attached to the original Stangg instead of his twin. This is absolutely crazy if you're able to get Stangg through. Commander's Plate and Swiftfoot Boots are the other protective equipment in the deck and complement the hammer quite well. The boots gives hexproof while the plate gives protection against 3 colors as well as a considerable PT boost. The best thing about the protection is potentially attacking without getting blocked by creatures of any of those colors, which help get Stangg through for commander damage. Same with Prowler's Helm. Very few walls are played in the format, so this has a high likelihood of making both Stangg and his twin be unblockable. While a lot of these previously mentioned equipment have some form of boost to power as a bonus, they don't all do. However, Helm of the Gods and Nettlecyst make the most of that. These cards are absolutely ridiculous here. Not only are they going to be counting those auras and equipment already attached to Stangg, but they'll also then count those copies on his twin when created. This essentially doubles their effect. This makes Stangg easily lie in the one-shot kill zone. That's why making him unblockable, as previously mentioned, is definitely a plus. So much so that Kessig Wolfrun and Rogue's Passage are also included. Granted, the first one gives trample and not unblockable, but you can also pump Stangg. And if he has trample, any excess damage can still hit the opponent. So it's still amazing. Oh, and that's without counting the robot Tanuki. Imagine getting a ton of green mana before an opponent can even choose blockers, then sinking all of that into Kessig Wolfrun, or using it to activate Rogue's Passage. Best of all, neither take up a slot in the deck. Going back to just how powerful we have the potential of making Stangg, some spicy tech I have for you is one of my favorite interactions in the game, Mycosynth Lattice and Bludgeon Brawl. With the former, you turn all permanents into artifacts, and then with the latter, you can equip them all. Not only will this make Nettlecyst even more busted, but you being able to equip Stangg with any non-creature, non-equipment artifact means that those artifacts will get duplicated when you attack with him. Imagine equipping all of your lands for 0 mana. Then you'll create copies of those lands when you attack. Lands you can then be able to tap for mana in your second main phase to cast even more spells. And that's just your floor. The ceiling is limited only by your imagination. But I absolutely love this interaction. As for the auras of the deck, I also prioritized those that had triggered abilities. Dragon Mantle, Frog Tongue, Karametra's Favor, Rune of Might, Rune of Speed, Setessan Training, Sheltering Boughs, Cartouche of Strength, Warbriar Blessing, and Iros' Blessing all trigger upon entering the battlefield. The first 7 all draw us a card with their trigger, which is not only great at replacing itself, but also drawing us a card when copied whenever Stangg attacks. They still have useful effects like giving Fire Breathing, Reach, Trample, and Haste. However, their main function is drawing cards while being cheap auras. The last 3 have some form of interaction when entering the battlefield. The first 2 have Stangg and his twin fight a creature you don't control, while the third one deals 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. They also have stat boosts as a bonus. Bequeathal, Fruit of the First Tree, Pattern of Rebirth, and one with the Kami trigger when the enchanted creature dies. Granted, we don't want Stangg to die, but his twin's death is inevitable because he, along with all of his copied auras and equipment, have to be sacrificed at the end of the turn. Bequeathal is essentially Skull Clamp in aura form, which is amazing. Fruit of the First Tree takes us further by drawing us a ton of cards plus gaining us a ton of life, which further protects us against creature-heavy decks. One with the Kami also helps us against creature-heavy decks by creating a ton of 1/1 creature tokens that can be used to chump block or equip Skull Clamp 2. Even then, Pattern of Rebirth might be the best one of these. With it, you're essentially cheating any creature from your library directly to the battlefield each turn. While I'm not using this to cheat in Blightsteel Colossus and things of that nature, it'll definitely help get all of our synergy creatures out quickly, but we'll see those soon. Alpha Authority, Canopy Cover, and Bear Umbra are the defensive auras. While the deck already has a lot of defensive equipment, it's still useful to have even more if it's a Voltron deck. However, these aren't just for protecting Stangg. The first 2 can also be used offensively since they have evasion potential. And Bear Umbra is absolutely busted since it untaps all of our lands. Unfortunately, it won't trigger with Stangg Twin, but that's okay. Ancestral Mask is the offensive aura in the deck and is absolutely busted. If you recall what I mentioned earlier about Helm of the Gods and Nettlecyst, you can already imagine how this can get out of hand quickly when we create that Stangg Twin along with all the aura copies attached to it. This aura gives Stangg a massive boost. Not as much as Nettlecyst, but is still significant. Now that we saw the deck's auras and equipment, let's see the cards that best synergize with this strategy. Nylea's Colossus, Setessan Champion, and Eidolon of Blossoms all trigger whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield. So imagine the number of triggers you'll get each time Stangg creates his twin along with all the auras attached to him. Especially with the Colossus. Doubling Stangg power and toughness multiple times leads us into exponential territory. Even with just 3 auras, we've already octupled his power and toughness. The Eidolon and Champion each draws a card with their trigger, which is amazing. We're easily drawing a ton of cards each combat step, and even more if the auras are already drawing us a card with their built-in ETB trigger. Shishido the Shattered Blade also triggers thanks to Stangg's ability, but from both those copied auras and equipment. This is absolutely busted since he creates a 2/2 with Menace with each trigger. Not only does this help fill our board with a massive presence, but he also gives Stangg a +1/+1 counter at the beginning of our end step as a bonus. Kodama of the East Tree takes it a step further by triggering off of everything entering the battlefield, so long as it didn't enter because of its ability. This means that it'll trigger off of Stangg's Twin being created each time too. With the way that copy tokens work, those tokens also have the original's mana value. That means that you can drop more than just lands with Kodama's trigger. This is absolutely busted. If you're copying even just a handful of auras and equipment, you can drop lands along with other cheaper permanents. If you stack your triggers accordingly, you could first draw all of your cards from those card draw triggers, and then potentially avalanche that massive hand onto the battlefield with Kodama. Super busted. Wolfgar of Icewind Dale helps us double our attack triggers. Granted, if we don't have Mirror Box out, we can't keep the second Stangg Twin copy. That being said, even if we are breaking the legend rule, we still get all of those ETB effects from the multiple copies of Stangg Twin and the auras and equipment attached to him. In fact, only the auras would leave the battlefield along with Stangg Twin, because Stangg Twin going to the graveyard due to the legend rule means that they also have to, due to not being attached to a creature, but not the equipment. So imagine doing this with Hammer of Nazan on the board. You can have all of those equipment copies be attached to Stangg, like previously mentioned. And in any case, Wolfgar will also double all of the other triggers that occur when Stangg attacks. So even without Mirror Box, Wolfgar is too good to pass up here. Kodama of the West Tree and Kedis Emberclaw Familiar also trigger but from combat damage. Kodama ramps us for a basic land and potentially two if we also connect with Stangg Twin. Kedis is absolutely busted in Voltron decks, which is no surprise. These cards do some serious work here and are fortunately cheap enough to cast on curve. Witch's Clinic is another card that cares about our commander dealing combat damage. Being able to give our beefed up commander lifelink without even taking up a slot in the deck is amazing. Jaheira, Fiend of the Forest, and Sanctum Weaver are more amazing cards in the deck. Sanctum Weaver has the potential of tapping down for an absolute ton of mana. Keep in mind that Stangg Twin and his aura copies get sacrificed at the end of turn, so Sanctum Weaver has almost twice as many enchantments to tap down for mana for. Insane. Jaheira can also help us tap down for a ton of mana, albeit just green. That's because we can tap down those aura and equipment copies for green mana. As weird as that sounds, it's still pretty cool. The amount of mana we can generate in this deck is insane, especially with Aggravated Assault. With Sanctum Weaver alone, we could potentially get infinitely many combat steps since we can tap it down for red mana. All we need is just 2 auras attached to Stangg, because the twin gets copies of those 2, making it 2 more. It also counts itself because it's an enchantment creature, so there you have 5 red to activate Aggravated Assault. But we're also generating treasures with the deck, untapping lands with Bare Umbra, etc. So there are plenty of ways to go infinite with this. So long as we can attack undeterred, it's game over. Some final cards that I want to mention are Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, and Primal Vigor. It should come as no surprise how absolutely busted these cards are in this deck, especially with the way I built it. However, their secondary price tag is ridiculous. So if you don't already have them, can't afford them, nor won't proxy them, don't worry. The deck will still work just fine without them. But it bears showing because of the insanity of having them in play is quite real. The following cards are needed by every commander deck, which are the deck's card advantage, interaction, and mana acceleration. Soul's Majesty and Richkar's Expertise are some more ways to draw into epic amounts of cards, but are one-time use only for being sorceries. We already saw that the deck can already be consistently drawing into a ton of cards, but these let you draw them all at once when Stangg is super pumped. As always, bonus points for casting Soul's Majesty off of Richkar's Expertise. War Room and Sponder's Enclave are also included since they don't take up slots in the deck. It doesn't have that many colorless mana sources on lands, but it's a 2-colored deck, so we're fine. Thought Vessel, Decanter of Endless Water, and Reliquary Tower are obviously included because we're honestly drawing into way more cards than expected. What's interesting is being able to equip these to Stangg thanks to Bludgeon Brawl, and then copying them when he attacks. It's a neat way to accelerate your mana too. Speaking of, same with Soul Ring. That's pretty flavorful too since it's a ring, so you're essentially equipping it like the jewelry piece it is. However, you know I can't discuss mana acceleration without mentioning Farseek, Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, Into the North, Rampant Growth, Kodama's Reach, and Cultivate. Green will always have this advantage, so you might as well make the most of it, especially since mass land destruction is frowned upon, so don't mind if I get my 7th land while you're still on your 3rd one. As for interaction, the deck's running Chaos Warp and Beast Within to deal with absolutely any irksome permanent, particularly Maze of Ith type effects. We want to be able to attack with Stangg whenever we want to. Tybalt's Trickery is similar effect to Chaos Warp, but for the spell on the stack and not the permanent in play. We do not want enchantment nor artifact board wipes to resolve. We have plenty of ways to protect Stangg, but we also want to protect our board too, even if practically the entire board is attached to Stangg. A well-timed Heroic Intervention can also help with that too. As a bonus, it also gives our permanents hexproof. Plaza of Heroes can also give hexproof and indestructible, but only to a single legendary creature, which will probably almost always be Stangg. However, most of the deck's creatures are legendary, so this can also be used to protect them in a pinch, all without taking up a slot in the deck. Chandra's Ignition and Blasphemous Act are some more offensive interactions for when we haven't been able to develop a board while our opponents did. Curiously, with how large we can make Stangg, he will more often than not survive taking 13 damage from Blasphemous Act. Chandra's Ignition can not only potentially wipe the board, but also potentially win us the game too. If Stangg is large enough, all that damage is going to each opponent's face thanks to this sorcery. Do not underestimate it in Voltron decks. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 7 fetch lands: Stomping Ground, Cinderglade, Sheltered Thicket, Highland Forest, Woodland Ridge, Command Tower, Ancient Tomb, and Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, since there's no reason not to run it, as well as 6 of each snow-covered basic land due to the previously explained mana acceleration pieces. Plus, Yavimaya also helps with the colorless mana source lands as well as the fetch lands being able to tap for mana. Oh, lest I forget, the fetch lands can be especially crazy with the Mycosith Lattice Bludgeon Brawl combo. Just equip them for free onto Stangg and then you'll create token copies of them when he attacks. This gives you massive land-based ramp all for free. That's something to keep in mind too. However, as with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Stangg Echo Warrior. As seen in the Brewery's previous episode, I absolutely love decks that are copying things. This one is no exception. Although they might seem like playing similarly with just swapping red for blue, Stangg is definitely a different beast. There is some overlap, so definitely check out the previous episode for more ideas, but this one aims to make the most of absolutely every aspect of what's possible with Stangg and overlapping as much of it as possible. That being said, you can take Stangg in whatever direction you'd rather have, like mostly auras or mostly equipment. You'll still end up with a crazy and fun deck. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons of the Brewers for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TGG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Meditor Kirby, and happy brewing.